Pretty Boy Floyd.
Charles Arthur Pretty Boy Floyd. A criminal portrayed by police and media as America's #1 bank-robbing, kidnapping, murdering gangster. Yet Charlie wasn't exactly what others painted him out to be. A bank robber indeed, but his style and crimes were quite the opposite of his reputation. He modeled himself after the old-style American desperados of the Wild West. The Daltons, the Youngers, Jesse James. He was the last of that breed. The last of the great American bank robbers. Charles Floyd was hated by the police, yet loved by the people. He became a romanticized hero, the Robin Hood of his day, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. While much of his heroism has been greatly exaggerated, there was an element of truth.
I'm the son of Charles Arthur Floyd, and I guess I'm the only person I've ever heard of went to school under an assumed name. And I knew that he robbed banks and things, but he was a good father to me, and he treated my mother well, and we had a lot of fun together.
My uncle was not a screwball. He took the money. He didn't shoot anybody in the bank, like Bonnie and Clyde, and take $20 and leave somebody dead. Even though he robbed banks, he had morals and he had scruples, if you can say that about a bank robber.
Charles Arthur Floyd became the epitome of the social bandit, a voice of the disenfranchised and the downtrodden. But to the Justice Department, he was just another gunslinging gangster.
Charlie Floyd was no gangster. He was a country boy turned bandit. But instead of a cow pony and a Colt 45, he chose a Thompson submachine gun, a sedan, to liberate money from those banks during the Great Depression. I'll make no excuses for Charlie Floyd. He was a criminal, pure and simple. He did bad things, but he didn't do as many bad things as everybody thinks. Actually, I guess what he was a country boy who just didn't want to pick cotton.
Born in the mountains of northwestern Georgia, Charlie was the fourth of Walter and Mamie Floyd's 7 children. Hard-working, honest, God-fearing farmers who shortly after Charlie's birth made a big move to eastern Oklahoma in search of a better life.
They moved in to the little town of Aikens, Oklahoma. That old town used to be called Sweet Town because they made a lot of good molasses there, and they had cotton gins, and there was some prosperity and hope, and that's really where Charlie Floyd came of age.
For years, cotton had led the farming industry throughout Oklahoma. Though it brought food to the table, it also brought bleeding fingers with everlasting calluses from picking it. Hard work that young Charlie soon realized wasn't for him.
Charlie Floyd was in many ways typical of the farm boys in the hills of eastern Oklahoma. Charlie worked hard ever since he was a boy. 12 hours in the fields was common, and sometimes far longer hours during the harvest season.
Growing bored and restless with the monotony of picking cotton, Charlie at age 10 committed his first documented crime, stealing cookies from a local store.
Those little cookies were kind of just the beginning. Certainly Mamie and Walter Floyd tried their best to keep these kids on the straight and narrow path. And Walter did it in his own way, usually with his hand or a belt, and Mamie did it with her loving ways and a little bit of the Bible.
But a little bit of the Bible wasn't enough for young Charlie. There was a lot of the devil in him and his friends.
Charlie, as a youngster, growing up, was jovial and a prankster and ornery. Of course, most boys are when they're growing up, but everybody seemed to think quite a bit of him.
No time or place was ever too sacred for Charlie and his pals to pull their pranks.
Everybody was Baptist and Yellow Dog Democrats down there, but they took those boys to those brush arbor revivals where they got big ample doses of the Old Testament and the fear of the Lord. And they sang hymns till they lost their voices, and they were there all night long under those brush arbors.
It was typical in those times for women attending these meetings to take their infants and wrap them in quilts and bed them down as evening approached in the straw in the back of their family farm wagons. Well, Charlie and his boys slipped out of this revival meeting and very stealthily and quietly moved those babies from one wagon to the next, until all the babies were thoroughly switched.
In those wee hours when those families were going home and those mamas started messing with those sleeping babies, we would have heard a sort of a simultaneous scream come out of those parts as all these people figured out that they had the wrong child. And it took far into the next day for people to get those babies switched back. That was the kind of devilment Floyd and his friends would pull down there.
But Charlie didn't stop with practical jokes. It wasn't long before he crossed the line between boyhood pranks and criminal activity.
The first real serious crime, if you don't count switching babies and stealing cookies, a serious crime Charlie Floyd committed when he was about 17, 18 years old. It was in May of 1922, down in Aikens, down in his hometown. And he and some others allegedly broke into a little country post office. And they made off with pennies. Not just a few pennies, but $350 worth of pennies that they had in there, I guess, for odd change.
It's his first felony. This was federal territory, the post office. The federal authorities were called down from Muskogee to investigate. Well, at this point, Charlie probably thought the heat was on, and they dumped the coins into a well on his grandfather's farm. Federal authorities came around figuring Charlie must be involved in this some way, in some manner. And his father said, no, my boy was home asleep at that time. Well, his father may have made a mistake covering for his son, because this was the beginning, in a small way, of his criminal career.
But even at the time, no one could have guessed this handsome young man would one day have a price on his head. By Charlie's late teens, he had had enough of this back-breaking labor and decided to take advantage of Oklahoma's dry state status.
Moonshining was very big in those hills in eastern Oklahoma, and Charlie soon was bootlegging whiskey for the local moonshiners, making a little pocket change here and there.
There were a lot of moonshiners going on during those days. Liquor was prohibited in Oklahoma, and so you had to take it upon yourself to create your libation, to cook your own whiskey out in the woods. And everybody had a bootlegger. The banker had a bootlegger. Sometimes the preacher had a bootlegger. Charlie Floyd certainly knew how to make moonshine and knew how to drink good moonshine.
Charlie was clearly heading down a crooked path when he momentarily became sidetracked. His diversion was Ruby Hargraves, a tall, thin, pretty young woman who found this square-jawed, handsome, well-built young man equally attractive. It wasn't long before they were both deeply in love.
They had a great passion, and you'd see them together down there in those country places, on those paths through the berry bushes and out by the graveyard, and they did some heavy-duty courting. And out of that passion came a son, and of course they married and had a very simple, straightforward marriage.
A few hours after I was born, my father came to the bed and got me and took me to a mirror, and he held me upside of him, you know, and he said, look, he's going to be a fighter. We're going to name him Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey was the heavyweight champion of the world. My mother said, no, we're not. We're going to name him Charles Dempsey, if we're going to name him anything.
These happy days for the Floyds quickly became overshadowed by poor economic times. Farmers were the